Hello, I'm Charlotte Jackson, president of the Camellia Rose, Georgia chapter of the Links Incorporated. And today I'd like to welcome you to join us and go red, live bold, live fierce, and live healthy. Why are Links who normally wear green going red? Because we want to eliminate heart disease. Like many other illnesses, heart disease disproportionately affects African American women, killing 50,000 of us every year. And so we brought together this panel of experts that's going to discuss ways that we can continue to live long and healthy lives. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning to each of you joining us for our Go Red for Women webinar, where we strive, as we heard from Charlotte, to live bold, live fierce, and live healthy. I am Juliette Hall, a member of the Camellia Rose, Georgia chapter of the Links Incorporated, and your moderator for today's webinar. As we have already heard, heart disease is the #1 killer of Americans, and it disproportionately affects Black women. And the purpose of this webinar is to raise awareness around heart disease and to be inspired to simply take better care of our hearts. In our webinar, we will hear from two presenters on heart disease, a medical expert, and a survivor. There will be time for Q&A at the end of their presentation, so please submit your questions in the chat box, and we will also announce a few giveaways for the audience at the end of our program, so stay tuned. But first, we have a surprise. We are excited to start our program with a musical selection by a very talented young lady, the reigning Miss Black International Ambassador, Sierra Jackson. Sierra is a singer, a speaker, a leader, and an entrepreneur. She has performed at the White House and has also been featured in national media, including Cosmopolitan, Essence, Washington Post, MSNBC, and others. Sierra is a proud alumna of two women's colleges, Spelman College and Yale University's Women's Campaign School. Everyone, I present to you Miss Black International Ambassador, Sierra Jackson.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sierra Jackson. It's such a pleasure to see you all this morning and connect with you. I will be singing Alabaster Box by CeCe Winans. So without further ado, here we go. The room grew still as she made her way to Jesus. She stumbled through the tears that made her blind. She felt such pain. Some spoke in anger, heard folks whisper, there's no place here for her kind. Still on she came with the tears that flushed her face, until at last she knelt before his feet. And though she spoke no words, everything she said was heard as she poured love for the master from her box of alabaster. You don't know the cost of the oil. No, you don't know the cost of my praise. You don't know the cost of the oil in my alabaster box. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that beautiful rendition of Alabaster's Box. That was lovely. And now we will hear from our panelists. Remember, if you have questions, you may submit them in the chat box and we will address them, as many as we can, after we hear from our presenters. We are thrilled to have our first presenter, a heart health expert, Dr. Jennifer Merez. Dr. Merez is a professor of cardiology and associate dean of faculty affairs at the Zucker School of Medicine at Hofstra Northwell. She is a national spokesperson for the American Heart Association's GoRed for Women movement She is the author of Heart Smart for Women, 6 Steps in 6 Weeks to Heart Healthy Living. And she is an executive producer of documentaries, including her Emmy-nominated documentary, A Woman's Heart. Dr. Merez, we are honored to have you join us today. Please share more of your story with us and what we need to know about our hearts.
Thank you, Juliet, for that kind introduction. Good morning, everyone. And I am thrilled to be here, honored to join you, to really to share with you some ideas and some suggestions of what you need to do to go heart healthy, to live bold, and to be on the journey to heart healthy living. So what I thought I would do this morning, and may I have my slides, please, if possible? So what I thought I would do, we would spend the next 14 minutes talking about, I will share with you some Heart Smart strategies for health and wellness. We will talk a little bit about what we know about heart disease in 2022 and leave you with a few simple steps that you can take to begin the journey to heart healthy living. Next slide, please. So we will approach this by looking at the scope of the problem of cardiovascular disease in women. We'll talk about knowing your heart healthy numbers. We'll end with some strategies to control heart disease, and then we'll share with you a little bit, 1-minute snippet from my recent documentary, Misdiagnosed. Next slide, please. So why are we concerned about heart health? Why does heart health matter? And your president shared with you some of the statistics that heart disease still remains the leading killer of women and men in the United States, specifically a huge burden for Black and African American women. And so as we think about heart health and why heart health matters, here are 3 highlights from the World Heart Federation. And one of the things to think about is that the greatest wealth is health. And I always say to my patients, your health is your most important asset. Here from the World Heart Federation, Heart Day September 29, 2021, a healthy heart is a key to a healthy life. And then what I love this saying, if you want to be responsible toward your family, be responsible towards your heart. And to me, that says it all. Why is this important? Next slide, please. We know, and before we go further, let's talk about cardiovascular disease. So let's frame this into the entire context. We use the terms cardiovascular disease and heart disease interchangeably, but what I want to share with you is just so that you have the framework correct. Cardiovascular disease, leading killer of men and women in the United States. What causes cardiovascular disease? It's a buildup of plaque in the lining of the blood vessels, as you see here. And when we think of cardiovascular disease, it encompasses the entire spectrum of heart disease, which heart disease, we refer to diseases of the blood, the arteries that supply the heart. And that can lead to one of the most common types of heart diseases, a heart attack. But there are other aspects of cardiovascular disease, high blood pressure, valvular heart disease, cardiomyopathy, and peripheral vascular disease. But we will focus on the most common type of cardiovascular disease, which is heart disease, diseases of the blood vessels. Next slide, please, that supply the heart. So as you put this into context, what is the magnitude of cardiovascular disease in the USA? Why do we keep talking about heart disease? Why are we making such strong efforts? And the American Heart Association leading the charge to do so. These here are the most recent statistics. And as you look at cardiovascular disease compared to cancer, compared to accidents, compared to diabetes, cardiovascular disease remains the leading cause of death for men and women in the United States. You look at the first graph here to the left that highlights cardiovascular disease deaths for Black males and females, Black males in blue, Black females in red, and you see more women died, more Black women than Black men died of cardiovascular disease in the United States in 2019, the last year we have statistics available. You can see here on the right, the same holds true for white women and white men, except that fewer white women compared to white men. We have reversed the trajectory there in the past few years. So a lot of work to do. Next slide, please. And you will see here the highest risk among young Black women. What do we know? Well, we know that cardiovascular disease affects nearly half of American adults. In 2019, the last year we have statistics available, close to 1 million Americans died for cardiovascular disease. We know that significant racial and sex disparities exist in cardiovascular disease. And as an example, we look at the statistics, hospitalized women with documented heart disease are less likely to receive guideline-mediated care, resulting in worse outcomes. When we look at the racial disparities, Black and African American men and women are 33% more likely than whites to die of heart disease, even in the hospital setting. And we know the highest risk for heart disease exists among young and middle-aged Black women in comparison to white women. And Black women, more heart disease risk factors. We develop heart disease earlier and ultimately higher death rates from heart disease. Next slide, please. We look at the facts from the American Heart Association about heart disease. And this is why I think today's session is so important. You will leave empowered to take steps to conquer heart disease and eliminate heart disease. We know the facts are that cardiovascular disease, diseases of the heart and blood vessels, causes close to 500,000 female deaths a year. That number was actually higher. It's 420. It used to be much higher, but we have made strides in decreasing the number of women dying from heart disease as we've studied all of the sex and gender aspects. 43 million American women are living with some form of cardiovascular disease. We know that it is a silent disease. The plaque builds up over time. Factors leading to heart disease begin in early adulthood and develop silently over time. The great news is that cardiovascular disease is largely preventable, and the American Heart Association highlights the fact that about 80% of cardiovascular disease can be prevented if we know our risk factors, control risk factors, and treat heart disease. And importantly, lifestyle changes can prevent or at least postpone heart disease. Next slide, please. So let us hone in on these two facts. What we know that in recognizing that more women were dying from cardiovascular disease than men, and the statistics were since 1979, up to until the mid-2000s, more women died from heart disease than men. And so there was an active call to action and campaigns were launched. Specifically, the Heart Truth campaign started just before the American Heart Association's landmark GoRed for Women campaign. This campaign was started to increase awareness because you know that lifestyle changes, as I showed you before, can prevent heart disease, and to do the science, to study the sex and gender aspects, and to provide the medical community with guidelines. So GoRed launched to empower women to be partners in their heart health, as well as give us in the medical community a roadmap as to how to identify heart disease in women and treat it with a sex and gender lens. Women Heart, the National Coalition for Women Living in Heart Disease, was started just before the GoRed campaign, founded by women who were misdiagnosed. And Women Heart is the coalition for women living with heart disease and a huge support group that definitely continues to educate women and give us the tools to be our partners in heart health, important in eliminating and conquering heart disease. Next slide, please. And so what do we need to know? I think recognizing we're all at risk for heart disease somewhere in our lifespan, higher burden of risk factors and higher death rate for Black and African American women, we need to know the symptoms of heart disease. So what are these symptoms? And there are indeed, next slide please, there are indeed gender differences. And here is a list from the American Heart Association. We know that chest discomfort, chest pressure, chest pain, something in the chest is definitely the most common heart attack symptom for both men and women. And typically in both sexes, we can have this pain or pressure. It can be radiating up to the jaw, the shoulder, the back pain. You can have difficulty breathing. It can come across as starting as nausea or heartburn. But what is important to know, any of these symptoms, you need to definitely call 911 and do not delay. What we have learned as we've studied the sex and gender differences is that there is a bigger spectrum of symptoms in women. And we know that women in the setting of a heart attack can present with milder symptoms. It can start just as a sort of funny feeling in the chest or chest burning, and over time increases. So what we encourage our women to do, if you know you are at risk and any of these symptoms come on and are not abating after about 10 to 15 minutes, you're home alone, call 911. So be aware, sudden onset of weakness, shortness of breath, unusual feeling of mild discomfort in the back or chest. And when we have our patient expert, a survivor of heart disease, Elma can talk to you about some of the symptoms she experienced. So broad spectrum of symptoms, but know that women can have mild symptoms without the chest pain or pressure. Next slide, please, to signal a heart attack. We need to know what are the factors that increases one's risk for heart disease. Next slide, please. And here is a summary of all the risk factors for both men and women. And you see here, it's high blood pressure, it's smoking, it's a family history of heart disease. If you have a relative, a mother or father or sibling with heart disease, immediate relatives. For men, you know, having heart disease in their 50s, for women in their 60s, a sibling with heart disease, that is your genetic predisposition, and you need to add that to sort of your heart disease passport. Smoking, huge risk factor. Diabetes, potent risk factor in both men and women, but much more powerful and potent and linked to heart attacks in women. An unhealthy diet, sedentary lifestyle, being overweight, race and ethnicity. We know that higher burden of cardiovascular disease risk factors in African American men and women, and more so in women. As we get older, our arteries, definitely plaque develops. So, and we have now learned that there are psychosocial factors, stress, being exposed to everyday stress, all factor in to risk factors to increase or risk for heart disease. Next slide, please. What we have learned over the past 2 decades as we have studied women, from a cardiovascular disease from a sex and gender lens, is that there are indeed female-specific risk factors. And we now know, in addition to our modifiable risk factors, where you see here hypertension, diabetes, cigarette smoking, as shown in that slide, that women who have had pregnancy-related complications, so pregnancy-related complications of hypertension, gestational diabetes, preeclampsia, and eclampsia, over the course, post-delivery, when these symptoms should abate, that it places you at risk for heart disease later on in life, as sometimes 5 to 15 years later showing up with heart disease. So really including your pregnancy history into your risk factor profile for heart disease is definitely important. We also know women with autoimmune diseases are at higher risk for heart disease, getting it earlier. And we also know that mental stress definitely increases a woman's risk of heart disease. Next slide, please. So where are we in 2022? And we come back to why heart health matters. Next slide, please. And looking at the fact that awareness is important and lifestyle changes definitely matter. The American Heart Association did a survey to see Are women getting the message since the GoRed for Women campaign was launched? And you see here, looking at the numbers, and we see white women in blue, black women in red, and Hispanic women in green, that in 1997, when the campaign first started, only 33% of white men recognized heart disease was the leading cause of death. 15% of black women knew that it was their leading cause of death, and 20% of Hispanic women. You fast forward to 2012, and with the campaigns, increasing awareness and storytelling, women sharing stories, the numbers went up for 65% for white women recognizing that heart disease was their leading killer of death, but really only to 36% for African American and black women and 34%, showing that we needed to amplify our awareness campaigns and probably customize it to meet the needs of our women, or black women and Hispanic women. Next slide, please. So where are we? And this is a publication from the American Heart Association from 2 years ago, where another survey was done. And the title of the article was "A Decade of Lost Ground in Awareness of Heart Disease Symptoms in Women," issuing another call to action. And here you see that when they compare the awareness from 2009 to 2019, we had actually decreased. That heart disease has definitely moved off the radar of women in the United States. When they broke the numbers down for black women, we were back down to probably in the high 30s, highlighting that we needed to amplify our efforts to empower women to be partners on this journey to eliminate and to conquer heart disease. Next slide, please. So we are in the era where a call to action has been issued. This here, an infographic published a few months ago in the Lancet from the Women's Health Commission, looking at women's health across the globe, highlighting the important need for us to focus our attention on looking at women's health much more globally. When we think about it, and I think it summarizes it all, heart disease, cardiovascular disease in women continues to be a major problem worldwide. It continues to be the leading cause of death of women in the United States. 35% of all deaths in women worldwide are caused by cardiovascular disease. And I think the summary to the right, that cardiovascular disease, heart disease in women, is understudied, underrecognized, underdiagnosed, undertreated, and we are underrepresented in clinical trials. Next slide, please. So what can we do to conquer heart disease? And I think importantly, it begins with women and their families as partners in their heart health journey. Next slide, please. We have learned the power of partnership from the American Heart Association's landmark GoRed for Women campaign. We know that women who joined the campaign, and were in the millions of women joining the campaign now, were empowered and inspired to make heart healthy changes. 90% of women, and the power of partnership and us helping each other, sort of the sisterhood on the journey to heart healthy living, 90% of women made one heart healthy change. 65% modified their diet to make their heart health much more important, from choosing to eat heart healthily. 54% chose to exercise, and 35% had the courage to broach heart health and their heart disease risk with their physicians or their clinical partner. Next slide, please. We at Northwell, at the Katz Institute for Women's Heart Health, I've had the privilege to co-author a book with my colleague, Dr. Stacey Rosen, and we have turned the book into a Heart Smart 6-week program. We give women the tools to know their risks, to know what they can modify, and in 6 weeks to choose to move, to make their plates more colorful. We include the importance of controlling sleep and stress. Women need to get at least 6 to 7 hours of sleep per night. And we also offer ways to mitigate stress. We cannot eradicate stress, but mindfulness, laughter, doing something to mitigate stress can definitely control for heart disease risk factors. Overall, we inspired women to know that small steps equal big gains on the journey to heart healthy living. Next slide, please. So as you think about what you can do beginning today or tomorrow to control your risk for heart disease and to conquer heart disease, I think a summary slide here says it all. You need to know your heart healthy goals, know your numbers, keep your own logbook of your heart healthy numbers. Summarized here, we know 30 minutes of exercise at least 5 days a week, important. And that could be walking, jogging, cycling, swimming, whatever you'd like to do, being active. And also, you can get additional information by looking on the American Heart Association's website to look at Life Simple 7. 7 simple steps to begin the journey to heart healthy living. Next slide, please. And so I come back to, would like to end with the power of partnership and the voice of the patient. And storytelling to raise awareness of heart disease prevention became a passion of mine. My colleagues joined me, and this was inspired by a patient who said that we needed to simplify the message and tell stories to really empower women to know that we're at risk for heart disease. And storytelling is so powerful to get everyone on the journey to heart healthy living. So we partnered with award-winning producer, next slide please, Trisha Reagan. And we've produced many documentaries, but our latest one, which we just finished producing before the COVID era, again to issue a call to action to increase awareness, was Misdiagnosed. And 4 women told their stories. You can see them here. And this was meant to create a call to action to really empower women to be partners in their journey of heart healthy living. And what I'd like you to do now is just take a look at a 1-minute clip so that you can, and then we will lead in, you'll hear from Elmer, her story. And really the power of partnership and the voice of the patient is so important. Next slide, please. Could you go to the video, please?
In the United States, there's a big health disparity between men and women in terms of the care that they receive. We're really at the point now where we're just beginning to investigate and understand why that is.
If we now know that women may have a different way of having cardiovascular disease, what about stroke? And what about infections? And what about cancer? And what about trauma?
Our society doesn't value women, and so and that's a broad statement, but what is really important for women is advocating for themselves, because unfortunately no one else is doing the advocating for them or us.
I would hope that this film would inspire other people to see that not only is it important, not only is it social injustice, but that we can do this. We can do it.
Thank you. And so this, our hope with that film and or brilliant stars sharing their stories is to issue a call to action to increase awareness, to really give women the tools that we have to be advocates for our own heart health, but our own health in general. And this here from Kelsey, who was the youngest person on the film, who highlighted the fact that she had gone to the emergency room 3 times, had symptoms, had lost consciousness. She woke up, and this is a quote. They just said, "You're dehydrated, you're exhausted, relax, you're anxious," and she was sent home. And it was not until her fourth episode that a wise female doctor recognized that something was wrong and went on to do a complete workup. So I highlight this story to say that the patient voice critical to improving healthcare. And as my colleague, Dr. Sharon Hayes said, we have got to advocate for ourselves. Next slide, please. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention. I hope I've just given you a quick snapshot of where we are, why heart health is important. Your health is your most important asset. Heart health is important for us all to live bold, live fierce, and live a healthy life. So thank you very much. Turning it back over to you, Juliet.
Thank you, Dr. Merez. And wow, that was very powerful. And that documentary, I look forward to seeing that. And I think this is a message for all of us, and particularly the women who are participating in this webinar, who are in the audience. As women, as we've already heard, we have got to advocate for ourselves. We have got to eat better. We've got to sleep better. We've got to exercise more. Come on. And we've just got to invest in our own self-care. So thank you, Dr. Merez, for your presentation. Very relevant, very poignant. And we look forward to hearing more from you in our Q&A. Now, before I introduce our next panelist, I want to know who's out there in the audience. So please take this opportunity. If you haven't already said hello or good morning, or now, well, it's not afternoon yet, but good morning. Please take the time and just say in the chat box, hello, and maybe where you're from, just so that we know who's out there. And you never know, we do have some prizes at the end of this webinar, so your name may be called. All right, our next panelist is another brilliant voice on heart disease because she is a survivor. Miss Elma J. Browning McKay lives an intentional life that is centered around service. In 2014, she was named an Amazing Woman on the Suncoast by the local ABC News affiliate. She was named she has been recognized as an unsung hero by the Community Foundation of Sarasota and has received a wide variety of other acknowledgments as a hardworking volunteer. She is a member of the Bradenton, Sarasota chapter of the Links Incorporated and is a very active member of the Bradenton alumni chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Incorporated. Elma is a graduate of Lane College and Webster University and is the author of 2 books, including Don't Judge a Book by Its Cover, One Woman's Journey with Heart Disease. Elma, welcome.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you. I would like to begin sharing my story with the generation prior to me because I grew up in a household where I was fully aware of heart disease. And that was because my father suffered with heart disease. He lost 2 brothers and a sister in their 40s to heart disease. So it was always alarming to us when the phone would ring after 10 o'clock at night. We would be a little stressed because most of the times it was the news of someone dying of heart disease. And my father take on it was that he would not make it to 50. And he would oftentimes say, I'm not going to live to see my 50th birthday. And he did not. We lost him at the age of 46 in 1978. Now, 8 years later, I found myself faced with that same disease. I had a heart attack at the age of 27. And at that point in time, I considered myself living a pretty happy life. I had graduated college, was married, had 2 children, and this was following the birth of my second child when I had the heart attack. It happened around the noon hour, shortly after having lunch and going on a walk. I was not aware. I was taken by ambulance, and I was not aware that I had a heart attack until the very next day. I was hospitalized for a week, and this was in the city of New Orleans. And at that time, I could say the doctors were a little bit dismissive of me because they could not believe that I had had a heart attack at such a young age. And not a lot of education was provided back then. We didn't have the internet then, and I didn't get a lot of information, and I did not have a lot of guidance. And in the course of a year, I was placed on medication right away. My blood pressure was up. But as the year passed on, I ended up moving to Florida, which I still reside in Florida. And Florida is a nice place to live, because one of the things I remember my father always saying is that shoveling that snow is not good for the heart growing up in the city of Chicago. And there are things that the winter months did that put stress and strain on the body. So as I start to try to sort and figure some of this stuff out, but I have to go back and say I was not as diligent those first 3 years of the diagnosis, because once moving to Florida, I kind of put it behind me. That had happened in Louisiana. I'm now in Florida. The sun is shining bright, and I become pregnant with my third child, because my goal was to have 5 children. And I had not been educated on the fact that having another child could cost me my life. So now I'm pregnant and needing to be monitored very, very closely. And after the birth of my third son, I was diagnosed with cardiomyopathy. And with cardiomyopathy, over the years, and the way my condition is I wax and I wane, meaning that my I shift back and forth. Sometimes I'm very strong, sometimes I'm very weak. Because we have to look at the fact my condition is 35 years old. And so pretty much all of my life from 1986 to date, I've been hospitalized once a year, sometimes 2 and sometimes 3 times in the course of a year. So I've lived with it constantly. In 2016 and back in 1997, those were the 2 times that I qualified for the transplant list, because my ejection fraction was down low enough. You have to be below 30 to qualify for a heart transplant. And mine had gotten down as low as 10. I operate now somewhere between 40 and get close to 50 many times. The average heart, the ejection fraction, unless you're pumping, is between 70 to 75 for a normal heart. That's the percentage rate that the average person operates at. So I've lived all of these 35 years with a very, very weak heart, but that is stronger at certain points in time. So what happened after I was diagnosed with cardiomyopathy? That's when I took the disease serious. So by 1989, I realized, because I tried to get my medical records from Louisiana and could not. So that's when I realized, I need to manage my own medical records. So I started keeping my medical records. I've always been a nosy person, so I would always read the chart at the foot of the bed. That's how they used to keep the charts back then. You'd have the chart sitting at the foot of the bed. So I always read it. So I was always aware of what was happening with me or what someone was documenting on my case. And so each time I'm discharged from the hospital or even leaving an office visit, I access a copy of my medical records. And I have a large file cabinet that strictly stores my medical records now. I did say to myself earlier that I need to go ahead and scan all of those documents to have. The point that I made in bringing up my father's case is that we have to look at, if you're operating as a proactive patient and managing your healthcare, because you're the number one person that knows your body best, you have to know your family history. My family history was very important to this, and it is documented in my medical records. And I make sure that each of my doctors on the team are aware of my family history, because I was told early in this that I would develop other diseases along the way. From taking the Lasix to remove the fluid from around my heart, I've ended up with kidney disease, stage 3 kidney disease. I was told that I would end up with diabetes. I received a diabetes diagnosis 20 years ago, and I am an insulin-dependent diabetic and have been on the insulin for about 10 years. So, and then I make sure that all of my doctors are in clear communication with one another. I make sure when I go in for a visit that if I had any visit with another doctor, that they have information on that visit, or if I had a hospitalization, that everybody's fully aware and communicate. Mistakes have been made along the way. Mistake was made where a cardiologist I had a little over 20 years ago decided I would take my medication every other day instead of every day, because you're just too young to be on so much medication. And it caused me to have heart failure twice within a 2-week time period. And it was agreed that I did not need to ever be taken off my medication again. I would like to move forward into this pandemic, because the pandemic has been kind of challenging for individuals like myself who are heart disease patients, because the signs and symptoms of COVID-19 and heart failure are very, very similar. So in May, in May of 2020, during a routine office visit, the physician's assistant made a decision that my beta blocker I had been taking since 1996 when it came on the market, that I should change to this new beta blocker, that it would be better for my condition. And so I said, well, what does Dr. King say about this? And he said, we'll check with him and double check. So the communication happened with the doctor. The cardiologist said, yes, that would be a good move. I was a little hesitant about it, but the change was made. So I'm taking this new medication. I was on GoRed, and this new beta block was called metoprolol that they wanted me taking. So I began taking it. Within about 3 weeks on that medication, I started showing signs of heart failure. So I'm weak, I'm tired, I'm calling the doctor. I end up being told by my cardiologist to go to the emergency room. I go to the ER. I'm hospitalized for 2 days. Those 2 days I was told it's not my heart condition, that I'm fine, just go home. Everything's fine with my heart. They had run the battery of tests. Well, June passes, July, August, September. I am getting weaker and weaker. I am continuously, aggressively going for COVID tests. Now I can't even get into the doctor's office. Each time I'm calling, I'm told to go to the ER. I don't want to go to the ER. We're all operating in a little bit of fear. Faith and fear don't operate well together, but I was operating somewhat in fear, thinking I'm about to succumb to this disease. I keep testing negative for COVID, but I'm positive for the signs and symptoms of heart failure. But I'm being told that it may not be my heart, but then it wasn't COVID. So in October, I pass out at home. My husband takes me to the ER. And I was in heart failure, but my blood pressure was very low. I was the sickest I had known myself to be in over 20 years with the disease. And I'm thinking, okay, so now the disease has caught up with me and I'm about to succumb to it. I'm laying there in the hospital and I'm thinking, and I make a decision. And the decision is I need to detox from these drugs. I think it's that new drug that's doing this to me. The doctor disagreed with me. I refused to take it. I said, I'm not taking that new beta blocker anymore. The battery of tests were going on then. I refused to take it. I said, I need to be placed back on GoRed, the drug that has worked. Carvedilol is a generic version of it. And after 14 days in the hospital and being taken off of that drug and placed back up on the drug that worked for me, I started to get better, because I had decided this was it. This was now my time. I've exceeded the initial time they told me I wouldn't live to 40 when I initially had the heart attack. And I'm looking, I'm 63 years old, so it must be time. But that wasn't the case. There was also another drug, because I have to mention this, that I had been on in 2016 that was new on the market. It's called Colanor. I'm back on that drug right now. But I have to say this, when you're managing all of this and you're in and out of doctors' offices for almost 4 decades, You spend a lot of money. I've spent a lot of money on my medical care over the years, a lot. It would be a nice retirement fund sitting there if I had just a half of that money. But when new medications come on the market, they're pretty costly. And this medication, Colonar, when I started on it in 2016, because that was when I got this internal defibrillator and pacemaker and had to stay in the hospital a few weeks because I couldn't be released until this was implanted. But that medication, and this is when I was placed on the transplant list again. Well, that medication was helping to slow my heart rate down. And I was told, you'll have access, because when I was told the cost of this medication, I was thinking that's pretty costly. It's running about $3,000 a month with my insurance that I had at the time. But I had so many medical bills that year, I didn't have to pay that much for that prescription. And toward the end of the year, I was getting it for nothing. Well, the new year came and the pharmaceutical company was no longer giving me that medication, could give me the medication, because they said that if I could not afford to buy it when that plan year ended, that the pharmaceutical company could give me that medication. Well, that didn't happen. So now the doctor and I were negotiating with one another, and we decided with the medications that I was on, I could really do without Colonar. So I did without that medication for a couple of years until that stay in 2020. And what I asked is that I be placed back on that medication. Let's run it now and see what this insurance price will be for me to be on that medication, which now I pay $300 a month for that medication, which is, it's really good. I mean, $300 every 3 months, for it, because I get my medication quarterly. So what I noticed, because of me, I'm going back to seeing how nosy I am as a patient. What I realized is that the PA had documented in the medical records that the reason for my heart failure is because the patient could not afford to buy the medication that she needed. And I had to have that corrected, because the reason I had heart failure was because of the metoprolol. The Colonar does slow down my heart rate, but I hadn't been on that medication for 3 years. I took it in 2016 to 2017. I had not taken that medication from 2017 to 2020. And my cardiologist, he and I had a meeting after that hospital stay. He apologized for the mistakes made. He knew that he should not been following the guidance of his PA, that he had been my cardiologist long enough that he should have been more diligent. And he knew that that type of change didn't make, because of past episodes that I had whenever we played around with certain medications, knowing how closely I needed to be monitored when changes were made. And he apologized that I had to be the one to figure out what was wrong, that professionally he should have saw what was happening. So with all of that said, as far as the symptoms between COVID and with congestive heart failure, the shortness of breath, the fatigue, the coughing, the nausea and vomiting, all of these things were so parallel to one another as when dealing with it back in 2020. And support was not there. That it just was not there for us as patients. But I want to say that the things that have helped me a lot over the years is my candidness and being straightforward, me documenting my numbers. I never go into the doctor without knowing my numbers. I weigh myself every day. I know what my blood pressure is. I know what my blood sugar levels are. I'm aware of all of those things, because I'm not going to blindly, and I say this to other women when I'm advocating and talking to other women that I learned in this community that have heart disease. I say, you have to know yourself. You know yourself better. You don't show up. One woman that I know that passed away during COVID with heart disease, and I've tried with her for 10 years to let her know, don't go to the doctor and expect the doctor to tell you what's happening with you. Go with the information. Inform them as to what is happening with you so they can work with you. It is a partnership, but you have to be your strongest advocate. And you should always have a family member or close friend that is aware of what's happening with you and your disease. I learned a long, long time ago, you have to minimize the stress level. I had to divorce a person. I had to get the father of my children out of my life because he was a stress factor and not good for my life, because people really can make you sick. And we have to look at that fact. You have to take your medications. You do have to exercise, and exercise is not a chore. You have to just look at what ways do I get exercise. You can get exercise house cleaning the bathroom. So just look at how can I be up and about moving, because each time I'm down with the disease, I always look at how am I going to get back up and get back going. And also getting back to the advocacy, I realized cardiac rehab is supervised exercise. Each time I have an episode, I demand going into cardiac rehab. But what I've learned over the decades, most of the times, it was white males in cardiac rehab, not black males, not black females, and very few women. But I would be in those cardiac rehab programs with the white males. So we have to know what's in our communities. I moved to a medical rich community. I've also gone to the Atlanta area because Emory Hospital in Atlanta, because I'll get a second opinion, and I've gotten a second opinion a couple of times regarding my heart disease. And so there was an episode I had in the hospital back in around 2000 where my cardiologist was on vacation, and the visiting cardiologist, she came to my room at 5 a.m, and her words were, "Well, if you go into heart failure like this again, we're not going to know what to do with you." And that didn't make much sense to me, because I needed to ask the question, what do you mean you're not going to do it with me? But she was talking about the ejection fraction being so low. And so I did receive a referral for a second opinion, went to Emory, and it was Emory Hospital that put me on the doctor there, the doctor by the name of Andy Smith, that put me on some better medications that the doctors here in Sarasota were able to work and manage. So with all of that said, we just have to look at our life as a whole, how we live our lives, who are the people that we have in our lives, how much you do have to love yourself first in the process of dealing with this disease. Excuse me. I can't do like my father did and claim it. I would not claim death at an early age. I desired to see my children grow up to become adults, my 3 sons. Then I had a reason for living to want to see the grandchildren and what would become of them. And the blessings from God is my 18-year-old, my firstborn granddaughter, she graduates from high school this year. I was happy during this pandemic to go with her on a couple of college tours this past fall. And I look forward to sitting through that graduation when she graduates this upcoming spring. So we have to look at our reasons for living. We have to look at our purpose in life and not sit down and just accept it. We can work it. It is a manageable disease. The heart is a muscle. It has healing power. Although my condition waxes and wanes, meaning strong sometimes, weak sometimes, I have to look at, okay, that is what it is, and I can live with it as it is. So the things and the people that we do, I'm closing out. And I thank you all very, very much for listening to my story. I could share a lot about it. Oh, and I need to say the book on my heart condition hasn't been published yet because I'm making modifications to it. I had finished and thought it was ready in 2019, and the pandemic made me make changes to it. Thank you.
Well, Elma, thank you. That was such a powerful story. And I know that there are going to be some questions from the audience, but I just also want to commend you, Elma, because you have given us a picture of what being an advocate for your life looks like. Mm-hmm. And I thank you for exhorting us to know ourselves and to know our numbers, because truly we can't walk into the doctor's office, as you said, and have that doctor tell us about us. We have to go in there prepared. So thank you for just sharing that powerful story with us, and we look forward to hearing more. And at this time, we should have all of our panelists back together now so that we can take some questions from the audience. We just have a few minutes for Q&A, and I want to begin with a question. This will be for you, Dr. Merez, from Adria Welcher. Her question is, as we consider ways to reduce racial and gender disparities in those affected by cardiovascular disease, what attention has been given to the role of discriminatory treatment by physicians? For example, ignoring concerns raised by Black female patients. I mean, just like what we heard from Elma. So,
great question. This is a work in progress. We are at our infancy in the medical community, and I'll tell you, we now have the evidence, even though we knew it existed. Dr. Richard Williams at Harvard has written and has published on the everyday discrimination score. So he and his researchers have built a lot of factors every day, the microaggressions that Elma spoke about being ignored. And he has correlated it with biological effects, increase in the inflammatory markers, increase in cortisol levels. So he has shown that all of these discriminatory factors and racial discrimination and factors that contribute to racism has a biological effect. And so that data is published, the evidence is there, and we in the medical community are now working on reforming and expanding teams. So we're doing a lot of education. One of the key things we know, and this is work led by Dr. Quinn Capers, there are many people working on this at the American College of Cardiology, Dr. Pam Douglas, Quinn Capers, Clyde Yancey, all leading the charge to really, and Dr. Michelle Albert, to talk about how we expand and train the cardiovascular team. So there is a huge effort. We're in our infancy, but the evidence is there now. We have known it, and all the medical societies and organizations and health systems are working to do this. One key thing is by diversification of the workforce. When you have more people that look like me, look like Elma, look like you, we definitely can help build the trust and eliminate some of those discriminatory practices. And that is also important.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
A work in progress.
Okay. So, and we have another question, and that question is around our diets. Can you be more specific about what heart healthy foods, what are they? Like what food should we consume more of, and what food should we just absolutely avoid?
So great question. We didn't have time to go into it, but here's what I would say, simplifying it this way from the American Heart Association: make your plate colorful. So a colorful plate makes you already on the way to heart healthy living. And by that, I mean, what are colorful? So natural foods, right? Foods to avoid: the fried foods, the processed foods. Absolutely get rid of them. And we talk about that in our book. Restocking your pantry and your kitchen to get rid of all the processed foods. Anything that's going to live on the shelf for a week or two, there are preservatives there, and getting rid of those foods. Colorful plate, definitely. Fruits, vegetables. Portion control, definitely important to control weight, blood pressure, and diabetes. But truly, lots of fruits and vegetables. Fish, fatty fish, twice a week. And instead of no frying, you can definitely bake or broil. And I always say you can still enjoy your cultural flavors and your cultural. I mean, I'm from, originally from Trinidad. So we love spicy food, and we have adjusted in my family to make heart healthy substitutions, especially putting down the salt shaker, because we know salt definitely in African Americans and Black can predispose to increased blood pressure. So putting different spices, a little bit of pepper, a little bit of parsley, a colorful plate, I think, if you think about it simply, it's the way to go.
That's a big, tall order for those of us who are in the South who grew up on fried chicken.
But Juliet, you can sort of instead of frying the old-fashioned way, there are new ways where you can air fry, right? Where you'll still get the same flavors. Or if you saute it a little bit with a little bit of olive oil, it comes close and tastes just as good.
Very good. Very good. Well, here's a question that can go to either one of you. Well, I'll start with, I want to go back to you again, Dr. Merez. I'll start with you, but I want Elma to weigh in this as well. It's around inflammation, because in your presentation, you talked about knowing the blood pressure. You mentioned the triglycerides, the lipid panel, all of that. I've noticed, and maybe I'm asking this for myself, I notice when I go to the doctor, the doctor is not checking for inflammation. And that is something that I have had to do on my own. So, Elma, it goes back to knowing your numbers, which is what you encouraged us to do. So I guess what I want to ask from a medical perspective. So I'll start with you, Dr. Merez, and then Elma, I'll be curious to know if that was something you looked at in your journey too. But can you just talk about the role of inflammation and how that can be, if that is something we also need to go to the doctor prepared, with knowing our own numbers, because doctors aren't always checking for that.
Correct. Great question. So we know that inflammation plays a big role in coronary heart disease, the buildup of plaque. How we measure it is still a work in progress. We know that there are markers such as C-reactive protein that you can measure, a simple blood test, and other markers that can indicate that inflammation is active, even though some of the other risk markers may not be evident. And so the way it's used and recommended by the American Heart Association, that it should, we first start with the basic screening, blood pressure, diet, hemoglobin A1C, the full metabolic panel. And in some cases, if, like in Elma's case, there was a strong family history of heart disease, adding inflammatory markers to give additional evidence is definitely the way it's recommended. It hasn't become full stream that everybody gets it, but it's customized based on your individual risk. However, I would say that, depending on your family history, and when you look at, the fact that over, several million Black women, and you saw the statistics and the numbers, are at risk for heart disease, getting testing one time a baseline inflammatory marker is definitely reasonable. And it comes back to what Elma said, that you have got to advocate. You've got to go in. I always used to say to my patients, think of going to your accountant. Do you show up to do your taxes without any receipts or any story? You have got to meet me halfway, and you need to come in with information, your family history, how you've been feeling. I always say keep a logbook and have that dialogue.
Thank you. Elma, is there anything you want to add to that? Because I know there was a lot that you checked on, you know your body. So any thoughts?
The main thing you have to do, because daily you're living with yourself, the weight, you weigh yourself every morning and you weigh yourself every night. My marker was 3 pounds. That's what the doctor told me. That's what I monitor. If there's a weight gain of 3 pounds in the course of a day, then you look from your ankles up, and you should start sensing and feeling some of those fluids build up. I've always felt the fluid build up. You can feel it happening. So it's really just monitoring yourself every single day. And you don't allow that weight to build up and the fluid. The next thing you know, there's fluid everywhere.
I want to add one thing. I think it comes back to the power of partnership. We're all human beings, right? So you may have a day that it's celebrating, you go off the diet, or you don't eat heart healthy. Know that you can always start again. It's never too early to start heart healthy living, but it's also never too late. And have some compassion for yourself, right? So self-compassion, you've had that fried chicken. Next day, you start again and you say, okay, today I am, let that day is gone and I'm starting again. And I also want to highlight for dealing with stress, because we've learned so much about stress, that finding 10 minutes to do some mindfulness, some meditation. I always say 10 minutes of laughter. You know, I listen to my favorite music and dance when no one is around at the end of the day. Definitely takes the stress levels down, and we know it can, you know, decrease your blood pressure. So you could have fun while living a heart healthy life.
Thank you. That's good to hear. So I won't feel bad about my piece of fried chicken I may get out.
No, definitely not.
Well, Dr. Merez and Elma, thank you both so much for just sharing your wisdom and your experiences, your knowledge on heart disease. And I feel so empowered. I feel even more empowered. I'd like to think that I and many of us on this call, some of us may already know about our numbers, but it's like you can never have too much information. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And at this time, actually, before we announce the giveaways that we have for you, we want to bring Sierra back and grace us with another solo. So I give to you, Sierra.
Hi, everyone. I will be singing Colors of the Wind. The rainstorm and the river are my brothers. The heron and the otter are my friends. And we are all connected to each other in a circle, in a hoop that never ends. How high does a sycamore grow? If you cut it down, then you'll never know. And you'll never hear the cry to the blue corn moon. For whether we have white or copper skin, we need to sing with all the voices of the mountain. We need to paint with all the colors of the wind. You can own the earth and still all you own is earth until you can paint with all the colors of the wind. Thank you.
And wow, your voice is so beautiful. Thank you so much for allowing us to hear from you. And thank you for sharing your gift with us. This has just been a wonderful GoRed for Women webinar. And we just want to thank again my chapter of the Camellia Rose, Georgia chapter of the Links Incorporated. This has just been wonderful. And I see the comments in the chat box, and I think the audience agrees. So well done. Thank you to everyone. We have a few prizes now that we'd like to give away. And those prizes include a drawstring bag, the book, Heart Smart for Women, 6 Steps in 6 Weeks to Heart Healthy Living, written by our panelist, Dr. Jennifer Merez. We have a GoRed for Women mug and a cookbook entitled Cooking in Color. So we are excited to award those prizes. And our winners today are Belinda Browning, Tay Lou, Bernie M. Lawrence, Adra Welcher, and F. Warren Perkins. Again, Belinda Browning, Tay Lou, Bernie M. Lawrence, Adra Welcher, and F. Warren Perkins. Thank you so much for coming. And congratulations to you. And thanks to everyone else. Thank you again for your participation in our webinar. It has been a joy to serve as your moderator. And now we will have closing remarks from Dr. Angela Johnson, who is our Health and Human Services Facet Chair for the Camellia Rose, Georgia chapter of the Links Incorporated. Dr. Johnson.
Good afternoon. I would just like to say thank you to our wonderful panelist, cardiologist, Dr. Jennifer Merez, for her dynamic and informative presentation, Thank you, Mrs. Elma Brownie McKay, for sharing your heart disease story. We have all just been truly inspired. Thank you, Sierra Jackson, for the beautiful musical selections. Thank you, Juliet Hall, for serving as an amazing moderator. Thank you to our production director, Camellia Rose member, Melanie Jones, for all of your hard work. Thank you to all of the members of the Camellia Rose chapter of the Health and Human Services Facet Committee. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you to each of you for attending today. Let's take charge of our heart health. And by doing so, remember, go red, live bold, live fierce, and live healthy. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. And I am back just real quickly. I just want to remind the winners, the names that I have called who have won. In order to claim your prize, this is what we need you to do. There is an email link at the bottom of my screen or your screen, CameliaRoseLinksInc@gmail.com. Please email us with your contact information so that we may send you your prize. Again, CameliaRoseLinksInc@gmail.com. Thank you again and have a great day.